coming up here, it's my pleasure to welcome Master Herbalist Paul Schulick. He's the founder and CEO of For the Biome. And so keep your questions coming. Some of your questions Paul may be able to address as well. So go ahead and post those in the Q&A box as we go through our talk here. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Maggie. Pleasure to be here and an honor to be participating. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we are honored to have you here. And we have 45 minutes and we're going to cover a lot of ground as we talk about healing plant actives and how to harmonize your microbiome and your immune system with phytoactive synergy. Before we dive in, as I mentioned, you've just been such a pioneer in the industry and your experience is so diverse working in retail and the manufacturing side. And you were actually studying pre-med before getting into natural. Can you walk us through your path in the industry?
Sure. I started in 1978 in this chain of health food stores called General Nutrition Centers. And that was my training ground. In 1979, I, with my wife Barbie, purchased a health food store in Lexington, Massachusetts, worked there for 7 years. During that period of time, had a testing ground with thousands of customers and realized that there were groups of products that either weren't working, like high doses of vitamins and other products that were not available. Starting in the early 80s, 1982, started making herbal extracts in my health food store because the products were simply not available. So at that time, there was only one doctor in all of New England that was recommending herbal medicine. Obviously, the times have changed, but 1982 started making herbal extracts. 1986 started creating vitamins and minerals in the form of fermented food under the name of New Chapter. And from there until 2012, then was basically getting to a point where we were nationally recognized as a leading company and was acquired by Procter & Gamble. And then I worked until 2018 with Procter & Gamble and then moved on to start my own next chapter, my next venture called For the Biome. So that's about 45 years in about 2 minutes. How does that sound?
Excellent. Well, over that 45 years, you have way more than 2 minutes of knowledge that you could impart. So could you talk us through, 45 years in the herbal and natural products industry, what stands out in your mind as one of the key lessons that you would like to convey to our audience?
Sure. I think as we get understandably and positively immersed in the efficacy of our field, of our medicines, I think it's really important to embrace the historic relationship with our ancestors, with what I like to refer to as the lineage, the shamans, the wise women, the wise doctors, and particularly some of the natives, the Native Americans traditions. There's two quotations, one from the Black Elk, another one from the Arapaho that I think is very pertinent to just read quickly. The Black Elk said, "We should understand well that all things are the work of the Great Spirit. We should know that the Great Spirit is within all things, the trees, the grasses, the rivers, the mountains, and the four-legged and winged peoples." And then the Arapaho had a very well-known saying that all plants are our brothers and sisters. They talk to us, and if we listen, we can hear them. So I do my best to listen. And I think that's what our field needs to do as best as we can, is just to, and not to forget the ancestry from whence we came. So I think that's probably the most important lesson that I've integrated. And then I also believe that we can't lose, just like we understand that, as the Native Americans would say, that the Great Spirit is contained within everything. We need to not lose that spirit as we formulate our products. And in traditional Chinese medicine, the whole is regarded. I practice Qigong and Tai Chi every day, and the whole, the way the body moves is always as one. When we integrate herbal medicine, we want to understand and appreciate and embrace the whole. And I think, like when Da Vinci drew the picture of the Vitruvian Man, it's the whole that contains the beauty. And so as we start to dive into, like, for example, an herb like turmeric or a mushroom like chaga, we got to be mindful that we don't lose the power of the whole when we are digging deep into the individual. Otherwise, we get guilty of the same problem that modern medicine has, in my judgment, which is it's so reductionist. It loses the power of the whole, which is really what I think is our core message of the natural products industry. And so when we start making or delivering products, always keep that in mind. Am I being faithful with my product to this tradition? So in my health food store, for example, Maggie, I started realizing, this was in 1979, people were coming in for vitamin C. And people thought that the vitamin C, believe it or not, was coming from an extract of grapefruits and oranges. But I started learning very quickly that it was a hydrocarbonaceous intermediate that was created from glucose, and it had lost a whole. And so just like Shengeorgi, the person who discovered vitamin C and won a Nobel Prize, he said we lose, if the more we drill down and isolate, the greater the likelihood that we're going to lose the magic of the whole. And so that to me is a core message. And then in my formulations, I started seeing the science really supporting this. So early on, like in the early 80s, there was a study at the University of California. One of my favorite herbs that I actually wrote a book about, ginger, one of the most influential studies to me was, I was making a ginger juice every day. This is way back, of course, and I still do it. I was making a ginger juice every day, and there was this white gooey stuff that dropped to the bottom. It had no taste. And I thought, in my ignorance, I thought it would have no value. So, I just filtered it out, because the supernatant, which was this really potent, very tasty, spicy stuff, that's what I enjoyed. But then I saw this study, ironically, from the University of California, which showed me that precipitate had almost no value from a cell protective effect. However, when it was combined with the supernatant, the power of the supernatant had been more than double. So I have heard this story over the past 45 years, Maggie, in one form or another, hundreds of times. In almost every plant that I've studied, in almost everything that I've done. So the most important thing I would want to convey is that asking ourselves the question, is the product that I'm taking, is it representing the whole? Is it capturing that energy from the earth? And another influential piece for me in Chinese medicine is this concept called Di-Dao, D-I-T-A-O. Dao, most people understand as that flow of nature, the flow of wisdom. Well, in Chinese medicine, they believe that where a plant grows or was originated, carries a life force or a life energy. And so for me, recognizing and appreciating and looking around for your sourcing or for the herb itself, is it carrying that life energy from the earth? So if we're using a mushroom, for example, if we're using a mushroom like chaga, growing it on oats or on rice or something is good, and it can be beneficial. But ask yourself the question, do you really believe it's going to be as good as when that chaga is growing on the birch tree? And again, now what you see in the science is that when the chaga is growing on the birch tree, there's this compound that happens to be what I would like to call a virome modulator. I don't like using the word antiviral because we couldn't live without viruses. And again, this is part of this reductionist thing that we all, including myself, become guilty of, is that we reduce things down. So we think of viruses as bad. We used to think bacteria were bad. Well, it turns out that betulinic acid, or betulin, which is on the birch tree that the chaga evolves on, when it grows with that, it brings the betulin and converts it into betulinic acid, which is then this virome modulator. It uplifts and shifts around energetically your viral makeup and makes it more healthy. So it's not only integrating the whole, it's recognizing the wisdom of the earth. And it's just such an important part, I think, as traditional herbal practitioners, or as naturopathic doctors, or as whatever our field of healing is, always to recognize that wisdom. How does that resonate for you, Maggie?
I just want to say it's totally resonating. In fact, we had a comment come in from Lori, who just said, Paul needs to mentor other business owners. It's so easy to forget the basic tenets of herbalism, that the whole is better than the parts when combining it with the business of herbal products.
Yes.
And yeah, that's so true. And that's what we're gonna dive into some more here throughout our talk. I wanted to ask you some more about your approach to formulations. I know a lot of them involve fermentation. So can you share with us what drove you to include that process in your formulations and what you've learned through this?
Sure. Through fermentation, I like many people, especially professionals in our field, we've been drawn to this because of our own personal experience. So my dad was a pediatrician, a conventional medical doctor, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. As you said, I was pre-med in college and was really anxious or excited to do that. But as I got, when I was in college, I started getting sicker and sicker with digestive issues. And my dad recommended, understandably, certain drugs, but the drugs didn't work. And what worked was herbal remedies. This is back in 1973, 1974. And I couldn't eat or drink, for example, I couldn't drink milk, and I couldn't eat cabbage, right? And there were soybeans. I couldn't eat these foods. But when the foods were fermented, I could digest them and gain benefit from them. So it was my personal experience that informed me that there was a value in fermentation. So actually, the first product I made in 1982 for a new chapter was a prebiotic product, which you'll probably giggle at this, but you'll see my marketing skills. In 1982, I called the product Bowel Power because it was basically a prebiotic product. I sourced biodynamically, organically grown okra and slippery elm and marshmallow root and some other botanicals that were good for prebiotics. And then I combined that. We didn't have the word, I don't remember at least, the word probiotic in 1982, but I started making a microbial support product that had the best strains that I could find of probiotics. So that fermentation process has been a hallmark of my inspiration, because it's like, I like to think of our health as three parts: our mind, our body, and our microbiome. So now I'm here with you, Maggie, and heaven knows how many other people are listening to this thing, but in my mind, I feel very safe with you. And if I feel safe with you, my microbiome actually feels safe with you. And there's research that supports that my mind state is very, very important. So I focused a lot, and currently am focusing a lot on the way the mind influences the body. So I have a 7-flower infusion called stress therapy that I've worked on. The mind, the body, and the microbiome. So all three of those factors are all absolutely critical in terms of determining our overall health. And so when we look at fermentation, the microbiome for me is a really, one of my colleagues that I work with has referred to it as our co-pilots. There's, as almost everybody in this audience knows, there's more other cells than human cells that we walk around with. And if you don't honor that, much like I was saying earlier, you want to honor the tradition of our ancestors, you also want to honor the integrity of the microbiome. And so inherent in our formulations, and obviously in the industry now, is growing exponentially in recognizing the power of the microbiome. So that the fermentation is a really key point. And so we've done science, for example, showing I make an aloe oat ferment that we use on the skin. And we show that the activity of that, the immune activation is like 275% as a result of the fermentation. And then the anti-inflammatory activity is enhanced significantly as well. So fermentation to me, and again, just like with plants, you see the whole is more than the sum of the parts, especially from within a plant. And then when you combine plants, you see even more dramatic activity. The same happens with generating fermentation metabolites, what we are now calling in our industry postbiotics. So there's prebiotics, there's probiotics, and there's postbiotics. And in all candor, we've been producing postbiotics since 1986. It's been a key, it's what I call the jewels of fermentation. So I think that, and then when you ferment herbs, we started fermenting ginger, we started fermenting turmeric, we fermented black cumin seed. The more we saw and did research, inhibition of key inflammatory markers and enhancement of key detoxification systems like NRF2. So fermentation, the mind, you got to take care of the mind, you got to take care of the body. One of the best ways I think to best take care of the body with the herbs is also exploring new herbs. Yeah, echinacea is wonderful, and turmeric is wonderful. But how many people in the audience know about an herb like Cistus and Canis? I didn't know about it 2 years ago, but if I lived in Sardinia, I would have lived with it. Just like if I'm in Okinawa, I would have lived with turmeric. So I think it's really critical in our field that we continue to be open to new opportunities that are representing the wisdom of the whole, and taking advantage or understanding what is the impact of that on the microbiome. I think that is such an important point, that everything we do, be aware of that.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, but we also actually had a question come in too that I want to touch on this before we get too far ahead. This is going back to what you said earlier. From Mimi, she asked this thing of the viral modulator. She's never heard that before, and she's been in the industry for over 20 years. So she's asked, are we hurting the true understanding by talking only botanicals and not talking about the broader ecosystem?
Absolutely, it's a great question. And that is consistent with what I would call true holism. That is looking at, it's literally like widening our lens so that we can see what is its impact on all of these other factors. So yeah, you do need to be sensitive to what am I going to be doing? Like, for example, elderberry is a wonderful botanical. I started formulating with it about 20 years ago or so, and created I thought a wonderful product. But the way I would have used the product, it was just elderberry. So I would have used that product in combination with other herbals, just like in traditional Chinese medicine. They have what they call a emperor or an empress herb, and then they would have the supporting cast. You would want to do something similar, but elderberry is more what might be considered more of an activating herb, more of a stimulating herb, more of a boosting herb. What you really want to have is an herb that's going to be boosting and balancing at the same time. And you can do that in the context of formulation. I mean, Maggie, why do you think almost the majority of traditional Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese formulations include ginger and licorice? Because herbs like that soften or intensify or increase the bioavailability of the compounds. I have all these studies that I just don't, we don't have enough time, but you look at just one herb like turmeric, and there are studies showing when turmeric combined with ginger, with green tea, with Coptis chinensis, Chinese gold thread, you see this vast increase. So you have synergy within the herb, and you have synergy between herbs. And all of that is, when you start taking a single compound, like from green tea, you take EGCG out from green tea, what is the impact going to be on the virome, or your viral microbiome? Basically, we don't really know, because it's never been done before. That's why I started out by saying, let's always be mindful and respectful of our heritage. And our industry is called the whole foods industry. So we have to be aware to live up to that mantra of wholeness. And so I think that the question that came in is really so critical, because it is what we are. It's the mantra that we are invoking.
Absolutely. I love that. I love true holism, and talking about, on your website, you talk about the wonderful symphony and how it all ties in. And I want to step, going beyond too, in light of the state of the world today, global shifts in human health, climate, being such a concern. What are the most important things that we can do as an industry that we need to be thinking about to uphold plants as medicine?
Thank you, Maggie. Over the years, a major part of my life has been in creating tablets and capsules, and again, there's an extremely important place for that. When I was in Japan, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, one of the most impactful experiences for me being in Japan was sitting in a green tea ceremony. Traditional green tea ceremony. It took about 45 minutes to an hour, which many of us can imagine other things we'd rather be doing than in a green tea ceremony. But actually drinking or tasting or becoming one, it's almost like a reminder. We're so fast. Everything is so expedited that we're actually losing. One of my teachers would say, if you slow down to half your speed, you'll notice twice as much.
I love that.
So from my perspective, again, I've been a capsule guy, a tablet guy. So, that's been my deal. But as I started my next venture, I had a strong calling to actually experience the herb or the mushroom. And that's what we are now delivering as infusions with For the Biome, is actually drinking or tasting the herb, because within, or smelling it, I mean, just the moment you experience saffron and rose, you experience that fragrance, it's uplifting instantly. And you link with the herb. I would always say that when I chew on ginger every day, as soon as I do that, Maggie, I feel like I'm connecting with the earth. And that's what most of us are lacking today. We're lacking that connection. And our industry could value from more of that connection. One of my favorite sayings, Maggie, is where there is connection, there is no pain. Where there is pain, there is no connection. It's an ancient Chinese expression. And again, back to Qigong and Tai Chi, the more you integrate the whole as one, the more you bring the herb from the earth as one, that's when you deliver the true wisdom of nature. And that's when you could see, and what I have seen, miraculous healings. Because you're bringing in, we're so disconnected and we have so much pain. So I think exploring some of the unknown again, or looking back into our ancestries, the wise women were reported, and this has been validated actually in science, where the wise women would discover an herb when they would go to sleep at night. They'd put the herb on their heart, and the herb would speak to them. Now, again, in our system, in our modern world, it's obviously phooey. Nobody would possibly imagine something like that to be true. But when the science looks at some of those discoveries, well, it's quite surprising that vincristine and vinblastine were discovered as significant anti-cancer agents, and that's exactly the way the ancestors would recognize that. So I think that is one of the most important things that we could do. And then also, I think as an industry, it's just, this is where I really applaud and honor and revere the work of the American Botanical Council. The work to validate and to remove as much as possible the greed and the adulteration of our field. One of the major reasons why we're not more prominent than we really are as an industry is because of chicanery and lack of discipline and lack of intent. So I think that that's a really, really important part of what our industry really can do to advance. When you read an article that reishi is not reishi, or that many of the supplements that we take are adulterated. Saffron, for example, like 90% of all the saffron that's on the market is not saffron, or we lose credibility. So besides the fact that the drug industry has a very, very large lobby. By the way, I just want to circle back to Japan for a second. The other thing that our industry can mirror is what's going on in Japan, where 70+% of doctors are trained in herbal medicine. And who's number one or near number one in healthy life expectancy in the world? And who right now is number 39 in healthy life expectancy in the world? The United States, number 39, Japan, number one. So I would argue or suggest maybe we need to adopt a little bit more. And who consumes more green tea and who consumes more ginger? Japan or the United States. So we need to taste the herbs, become one with the herbs. And I think that's part of our solution.
Yeah, in terms of that, talking about being more thoughtful in our connection with the herbs. In a blog post on your site, you said that if plants could talk, they might tell us their secrets. I love this. They might tell us how their lineages have survived lifetimes. And because they aren't able to run away from danger, they protect themselves in clever ways. And that shows us their benefits. And I think that's just another way for us to think about this connection as you're talking about. Can you give us some examples of that and how thinking about herbs in this way can be beneficial?
Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite stories is when our ancestors learned, the way we learned about our botanical sisters and brothers was by watching nature, listening, as the ancestors would say. And when our ancestors would see a forest fire in Greece, for example, there would be a forest fire and a whole field of cistus and canis would be burned down as a result of the fire. And then our ancestors noticed, even with a severe fire and burning sun and ice cold temperatures, cistus and canis would come back. It would be like the seeds could endure enormous stressors. And the ancestors would learn from watching these botanicals, listening to them and watching from them, and then say, common sense, well, if that plant is carrying so much resilience, if there's so much resilience in cistus, maybe what would happen if I tried to drink or make some cistus infusion, cistus tea? And lo and behold, this is what happened, I'm sure, with turmeric. This is the way, through trial and error. We learned, we listened. And that's what, again, we need to become a part of. So I think that's all part of looking at nature and witnessing what it has to teach us.
Excellent. I just have to tell you, you're not seeing the comments that are coming in, but people are very inspired. Paul Schulick preach, so thankful is one of the comments. So thank you for everything that you're telling us. We do have more time, so if you have questions coming in, please do share them. One question that came in is, why do you think Japan is so open to herbals, and how can we in the US in this industry support healthcare practitioners who are open to this, and how can we encourage those who, as you said, people aren't being taught? How can we encourage and make connections to help foster, more of an openness and understanding of the benefits that herbs can deliver?
Oh, it's an amazing question. So Japan, if you've been there, there's a certain silence in Japan. Like when I was on a subway in Japan, you could hear this was like 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if it's the same today, but it was silent. There was no loud noises. People were respectful. It was quiet. Nobody was honking their horns on the streets. It was peaceful. In that environment, you can hear better. When we did research on cistus, we found that it could reduce certain markers of inflammation. And it was there, when you reduce the markers of inflammation, what you're able to do is increase immunological activity. So in Japan, I think their tradition is one of respect and one of quiet. And in that culture of meditation is where we have a greater chance of hearing what the herbs are trying to tell us. Now, in terms of our doctors, if I understand the second part of the question, is the second part of the question, how would we educate the doctor?
How can, I think it's more like, how can we make connections? How can we,
Yeah,
yeah, how can we help them see that, there are benefits to what we're doing if they're not learning
okay,
it in
I got
school?
it. So here's a twist for you, Maggie. Our industry, and this is what Whole Foods Magazine is one of its, I'm sure, its goals, is to inform us as a whole, right? To bring us together as a whole, and to be not as competitive, like as we've thought the Darwinian model is, but to be more cooperative. And I think the more we bond together as an industry and look at what each other has to offer in the context of the whole, I think that's holds the greatest promise for uplifting our position and with educating a larger audience. So I think it is in combination. I want to be sure, though, I say this other piece, and it's not directly answering your question, Maggie, so you'll forgive me. But when we have to be, when we deliver a product, we have to be sure that we can promise that that product delivers a certain level of activity, and we regain credibility. And I think the regaining of credibility as an industry, as a group, is going to be absolutely critical, so that not only, if, for example, if you look at turmeric as an example of a well-known herb, look at turmeric, and almost everybody in this audience knows that the active compound that we really want to keep an eye on is curcumin. But much fewer people would be aware of the turmerones, the other oil-based compounds that are present in turmeric. And it's that synergy. We did research years ago with Dr. Stephen Melnick at the University of Miami Children's Hospital. And he found that when you combine the turmerones with the curcuminoids, thereby you bring the greatest activity to the whole plant. But what I would want to do, or suggest to our industry, if I had a voice that was loud enough, is let's not just mark curcumin as a marker, and let's not just even mark turmerones as a marker. Let's measure, before you deliver your turmeric product, let's make sure we measure its ability to activate natural killer cells, or let's measure its activity to influence key inflammatory cytokines, or whatever, but give it a marker, a real life marker that's going to tell me what it's going to do for my body. So, for example, one of the number one drugs in the world is Humira, and it works through inhibition of a called tumor necrosis factor. Well, a number of herbs work on that same mechanism. But what credibility we would gain if we could start to show that our formulation has an impact on TNF alpha. And so that's where we, as an industry, if we combine together, we could start to make those kinds of changes.
Excellent. I want to stay on education. We had a poll at the start of the day, and I think that the result maybe surprised us a little bit. It surprised me a little bit. I think Len expressed that he was a little surprised, but the poll showed that when asked, we asked, about the most critical issue facing the botanical industry. Yes. And 27% said it was lack of consumer understanding. Yeah. And that came in ahead of supply chain challenges at 24% and climate change at 22%. Now, you took a knock at your marketing earlier, but I will say your website is so fabulously engaging and so much educational content, but also in such an entertaining and engaging way. In fact, we had a comment in the chat as well about somebody who was on your website, and they love the perfect blend of science and loving care. So I'm just wondering if you can share any insights for the 27% of us who are concerned about lack of consumer understanding about just best practices, how we can engage and inform with the consumer side of things.
Oh, I love it. So right now, consumers have significantly more, if they get really sick, they're not turning as they do in Japan. They're not turning to herbal medicines. They're turning to OTC and to pharmaceuticals. It's like 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. It's dramatic. So our credibility, our communication of credibility is to begin to demonstrate how the formulation has been studied, has been investigated, and you know, it's one of the most challenging questions, because we live in a world where people want something instantaneously quick. And so I appreciate your kudos to our team that created an informative and attractive website. I think with the wisdom of strong marketing, we only need some really, really good communication that's going to start to really break down the barrier that consumers still believe that the isolated model. Again, I think the experience is what would drive them. If you're still taking a pill or a capsule, you're still following basically, and I think that's why functional beverages are doing so well in our industry, Maggie. I think because people like kombucha. Nobody knew kombucha 20 years ago. Nobody, it was like, or maybe 25. I mean, when I started, I didn't know, I didn't have the slightest idea what kombucha was. So people taste it. And when you taste it, you sense it. And it speaks to you on a ethereal level. I mean, I hate to sound too gooey about it, but I do believe that. And so your immune system is so tuned into your mouth, your tonsils and your oral cavity, all that's communicating to your immune system instantaneously. So my advice would be, in our health food stores or in our cafes or whatever we communicate, give people the experience. Give people the direct experience, like a mini green tea ceremony, if we could do such a thing. Can you sit with me for 2 minutes, please? And I just want you to drink this cup of green tea, and I want you to experience it with me. Would you do that? And what I've done is I combine green tea with this, or I have cistus with rose hips, and let me just take a minute of your time and tell you what experience you're having. Because as a store owner in the past, it's that connection where there is no pain. That's what we need to highlight, that connection. And we need to reconnect with our experience of the botanical.
Excellent. I love that so much. And we're just about out of time, but we have one more question that Judy has been trying to get this question answered. So I do just want to throw this out for her in just the last minute that we have here. She said she's been trying to get information on, do you think that our modern ways of speed recipes and speed processing of foods and herbs have removed the incidental natural inoculation by beneficial microbes in our environment so that we're no longer ingesting them?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned. Yes, I think the bigger issue are all the chemicals in our environment and all the drugs that we're taking that are basically, just like we're seeing a sixth extinction of species every day. Hundreds of species are going extinct. The same is happening with our microbiome, and I think that to me. And how do you preserve that, or how do you restore that? I think it is through inoculation. of some of these strains that are elite or ancestral strains, as well as some of these foods. Like I've been studying Patagonia berries. And I think that stories like that, where you can still have the earth, the Di Dao, you're still delivering this incredible wisdom. And just like, it's almost like you remember the Chronicles of Narnia? You remember that story? When Aslan is basically shorn and almost dead, and all of a sudden he comes back to life. I see herbal medicine like that. I see herbal medicine as having an opportunity to come back to life. But we need to experience it again, and we need to revere it again. We need to worship it again. And that's the way our ancestors did it. And I know it sounds gooey, but it is what I think we need to do.
It absolutely sounds inspiring. And I just feel so, like I said, so honored to have had you join us. And I know we left some questions on the table. We'll try to get those answered for people. But Paul, I know you have left us just feeling energized and inspired and looking to do better. So thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you so much, Maggie, for having me and for our opportunity to communicate.